2 million years ago, stepping out onto the East African savannah meant walking straight into a slaughterhouse. You aren't the biggest animal here, you aren't the fastest, you definitely aren't the strongest. The landscape belongs to monsters. Saber-toothed cats as big as lions, massive bone-crushing hyenas, crocodiles that would eat today's apex predators for breakfast. So how do you survive a world that views you as a snack? You don't outrun it, you outsmart it. Meet Homo Habilis, the tough early humans we nicknamed Handyman. Standing barely 4 feet tall out on the dusty plains, they were small, weak, and extremely vulnerable. They didn't have claws or huge fangs to win a fistfight with a predator. What they did have was a slightly larger brain and hands built for a tight precision grip. That combination changed everything. Someone figured out that if you smack 2 river cobbles together at just the right angle, you get a razor-sharp edge. That edge was the only thing keeping them alive. Homo habilis weren't apex hunters chasing down big game. They were desperate scavengers, constantly hovering on the brink of starvation. Picture hiding in the tall yellow grass while a massive cat rips into a fresh kill. You have to wait for the killer to get full and sleepy. But wait a minute too long, and rival giant hyenas or vultures will swarm the meat. So you and your group charge the bloody carcass, screaming and swinging heavy sticks just to buy a few frantic minutes before the real chaos hits. By the time you reach the body, the big cats have eaten all the good meat. But this is exactly where those crude stone tools pay off. A lion's jaw can't crack open a thick herbivore femur to get the goods inside. Homo habilis could. Using heavy round stones, they bashed open the leftover bones and skulls to scoop out the rich marrow. It was pure, fat-dense energy that no other scavenger out there could touch. That massive calorie spike was exactly the fuel their growing brains needed for the next brutal phase of human evolution. Nightfall on the early Pleistocene savanna was a death sentence. There was no fire yet to push back the dark, so Homo habilis just had to disappear when the sun set. They climbed high into the trees, huddling together in total silence while the real killers prowled the dry dirt below. A single rustle in the dead grass could end you, and the environment was turning against them. Lush forests were drying up, giving way to endless, harsh grasslands. Pushed out of the trees, our ancestors had to figure out how to survive in the open, turning every meal into a deadly daily gamble. They weren't just picking up any old rock they tripped over. Homo habilis actually understood geology. They knew exactly which volcanic stones, like basalt or quartz, would break predictably and hold a sharp edge. Paleontologists have found that these early toolmakers carried specific, untouched stones for miles across that lethal landscape. That's a huge cognitive jump. They were planning ahead, anticipating exactly what they'd need to survive in a world where seeing tomorrow was always a long shot. But the sharpest rock in the world won't save you if you're alone against a pack of hungry predators. Out in the open, you had to trust your group with your life. A lone handyman was a dead handyman. They scavenged as a tight unit, which kick-started a massive push for communication. They couldn't speak like we do, but fossil skulls show the speech centers in their brains were expanding. They relied on sharp warning calls, precise hand gestures, and intense eye contact to pull off those dangerous raids on predator kills. Physically, Homo habilis was caught between 2 worlds. From far away, their long, heavy arms still looked like a tree-climbing apes, perfect for hauling themselves up into the branches when trouble showed up. But look at their hands and feet, and you see the modern world creeping in. Strong foot arches let them walk efficiently for miles across the baked earth. Broad, sturdy thumbs absorbed the shock of hammering stone against stone. The actual work of shaping tools was physically reshaping the human body, generation by generation. Heading up into the trees at night didn't actually mean you were safe. Up in the Pleistocene canopy lurked Dinophilis, a massive false saber-toothed cat built for ambush. These weren't sprinters chasing prey across the plains. They were heavy, muscular climbers. Picture waking up in pitch blackness. You hear heavy claws digging into the bark below you. Homo habilis mothers would grip their infants, freezing in place, praying the thick leaves would hide them from the glowing eyes scanning the branches. Sleep wasn't rest, it was just a pause. If you survived the night, you woke up starving. The brutal daily grind of scavenging started all over again. But cracking open those bones paid off in a huge way. Processing tough plant matter burns up a ton of metabolic energy and requires a massive gut. By pivoting to the high-quality fats and proteins locked in scavenged meat, Homo habilis could actually afford to shrink their digestive tract. That one trade-off freed up huge amounts of biological energy, and their bodies routed that extra fuel straight to their growing brains. Then came the dry season on the African savannah, bringing a totally different kind of nightmare. As the temporary rivers dried up, every living thing had to crowd around the few permanent lakes left. For Homo habilis, just getting a drink of water was a deadly gamble. You didn't just stroll up to the water's edge and dip your hands in. Those thick green reeds masked massive ambush predators. We're talking ancient crocodiles that hadn't changed a bit since the dinosaurs. A thirsty hominid had to move fast. You scan the murky water for cold reptilian eyes, snatch a handful of water, and jump back immediately. The ancient watering hole was easily the most dangerous real estate on Earth. But big cats and giant reptiles weren't the only neighbors out there. Homo habilis shared this harsh landscape with completely different hominid species. One of the strangest was Paranthropus boisei, a heavily built cousin who took a totally different evolutionary bet. While our handyman ancestors figured out tools and scavenged meat, Paranthropus doubled down on raw chewing power. They evolved massive jaws and huge flat teeth. Thick muscles anchored to a tall, bony crest on their skulls powered the setup. It basically turned their faces into biological grinding machines, perfectly built to crush hard nuts, roots, and fibrous grasses. For thousands of years, these two different branches of the human family tree crossed paths around those ancient lakes. They mostly ignored each other, kept apart by their radically different diets. The heavy-jawed Paranthropus had a steady, reliable food supply, just chewing tough plants all day. Homo habilis, meanwhile, lived in chaos, chasing vultures and risking their lives for a scrap of marrow. But when the climate shifted again and that tough vegetation died off, the specialized chewers were out of luck. Those massive jaws couldn't save Paranthropus when their one food source turned to dust. Ultimately, the flexible, adaptable, and incredibly stressful lifestyle of Homo habilis turned out to be the winning survival strategy. But that adaptability came with a steep hidden cost, especially for the young. As Homo habilis brains grew larger, babies had to be born earlier just to physically fit through the birth canal. A newborn antelope can stand and run within an hour. A Homo habilis baby? Completely helpless. They couldn't walk, look for food, or run away. Mothers had to carry their infants everywhere, gripping them with one arm while trying to strike a stone tool or dig for roots with the other. This long childhood was a massive weakness out on the open plains. It forced the whole group to slow down, shield the mothers, and share those hard-earned calories just to keep the species going. Yet that long stretch of total vulnerability turned into our greatest evolutionary weapon. Children spent years relying on adults, giving their growing brains plenty of time to watch and absorb everything. They saw adults choose heavy river stones and copy the exact striking angles needed to knock off sharp flakes. They memorized distinct alarm calls, one for a leopard in the grass, another for an eagle overhead. Toolmaking wasn't an automatic instinct passed down in their blood. It was early culture, a shared pool of knowledge taught and practiced every single day. The harsh Pleistocene left Homo habilis no choice. It made them history's first real teachers. Scavenged meat gave their big brains essential fats, but it wasn't the reliable daily meal. Scavengers could go weeks without finding a single carcass. To survive those dry spells, Homo habilis relied on deep plant wisdom. Armed with basic digging sticks, they spent hours pounding into hard earth to pull up tubers and starchy roots. Digging meant keeping your head down, eyes glued to the dirt, a deadly position when a pack of prehistoric hunting dogs creeps through the yellow grass behind you. Every calorie pulled from the ground came with a real risk of sudden death. Marrow and roots kept them going, but Homo habilis seized every meal they could find. They raided nests high in thorny acacia trees, dodging angry bird parents to swipe nutrient-packed eggs. They flipped rotting logs to uncover fat beetle grubs, snails, and scorpions, expertly crushing poisonous stingers before eating. Giant termite mounds were a gold mine too, offering a steady supply of insects fished out with grass blades or twigs. When big game carcasses were nowhere to be found, these tiny hidden calories meant the difference between life and starvation. The terrain was a constantly shifting maze of riverbeds and seasonal lakes. In heavy rainy seasons, dry gullies could turn into roaring torrents of mud in minutes. Homo habilis had to read the sky, spotting distant storm clouds over the mountains and scrambling to high ground before flash floods struck. Fossil sites in places like Olduvai Gorge reveal a clear pattern. These early humans kept returning to the exact same spots along ancient rivers. These were temporary butchering stations and tool workshops where they brought scavenged meat to process quickly before the smell of fresh blood drew local predators. Life on the run meant physical injuries were frequent and dangerous. The fossil record lays out this grim reality in the bones of Homo habilis. Foot bones show severe arthritis from miles of walking over jagged rocks, while jaw bones display painful, deep infections. Even more chilling are the unmistakable puncture holes in fossilized skulls, the exact width of a prehistoric leopard's or sabertooth's fangs. When someone fell ill or got hurt, it put an incredible strain on the group, forcing a brutal daily choice: stay and defend a wounded companion, or leave them behind to the African night. Predators weren't the only giants Homo habilis had to dodge every day. The Pleistocene savanna swarmed with massive herbivores that could crush a human without even noticing. Giant elephant relatives like Dinotherium, with downward curving tusks, moved through the trees like walking mountains. Rhino-sized giant pigs rooted through the brush, armed with foul tempers and fierce territorial instincts. A sudden stampede of these beasts could wipe out an entire foraging group in seconds. Homo habilis had to master animal behavior, knowing precisely when to stand ground and when to scatter into the bushes. Pop culture loves the idea of early humans getting cozy around a cave fire. For Homo habilis, though, deep caverns were absolute death traps. Those dark spaces already belonged to giant hyenas and cave leopards, waiting to drag their meals inside to eat in peace. Walking into a dark cave was basically asking to be eaten, so instead they made do outside. They piled up thorny acacia branches to build rough, circular windbreaks, just enough to block the breeze and deter smaller predators. It was crude, but it was their very first attempt at carving a home out of the wild. Sure, giant fangs and hooves were obvious threats, but the worst killers were the ones they couldn't see. The tall grass swarmed with ancient ticks, fleas, and biting flies loaded with disease. And when your diet relies on rotting, days-old carcasses, bacterial infections are a daily reality. Even a tiny nick from a stone tool or a splintered bone could swell up and kill you in a matter of days. To fight off parasites, Homo habilis spent hours on social grooming. This wasn't just about staying clean, it was the glue keeping their society intact. Picking bugs out of each other's hair dropped their heart rates, smoothed over fights, and built the kind of rock-solid trust you need when a hungry predator shows up. Locating a fresh kill out on the endless plains of East Africa wasn't easy. You couldn't just wander around hoping to trip over a dead antelope. To survive, Homo habilis had to watch the sky. Because they walked upright, they could see over the brush. Miles away, through the heat waves, they'd spot the dark, swirling silhouettes of vultures. To them, a flock of circling birds was a flashing diner sign for protein. Seeing the birds was just the starting gun, though. Once those vultures dropped, it was a mad dash. Every lost minute meant less meat to scavenge, and a much higher risk of slamming straight into rival scavengers drawn to the same prize. Just making stone tools was a bloody hazard. Bashing pieces of volcanic rock together sends razor-sharp shrapnel flying everywhere. With bare skin, these early toolmakers constantly sliced up their hands and legs. Catch a flying quartz flake in the eye, and you were blind instantly, a death sentence back then. But looking at the massive piles of discarded flakes they left behind, they clearly decided the risk was worth it. They weren't just blindly smashing rocks either. They had to read the deep grain of the stone, figuring out exactly how it would fracture. They pulled off this highly focused geometry while constantly checking their backs for creeping leopards. Late afternoon dry thunderstorms would regularly spark the sun-baked brush, sending walls of fire rushing across the landscape. Homo habilis couldn't control fire at all. To them, a roaring blaze meant pure, primal terror. The whole ecosystem would just lose its mind. Ancient humans had to sprint for their lives right alongside panicked herds of early zebras and gazelles. Thick black smoke choked the air, and the blazing heat could easily corner a group against a steep ravine, trapping them completely. But the fire wasn't just a nightmare, it was an opportunity. After the flames burned out and the earth cooled, the bravest scavengers would creep back onto the blackened plains. There, they'd find snakes, giant lizards, and small mammals caught in the blaze. They were perfectly roasted. This accidental barbecue was soft, safe from parasites, and packed with easy calories. It was just a taste of what cooking could do, a trick their descendants, Homo erectus, would eventually figure out how to use to take over the world. Getting to a fresh kill first didn't mean you got to eat in peace. A bloody carcass pulled in every hungry mouth for miles. A handful of Homo habilis would suddenly find themselves in a screaming match with packs of jackals and massive prehistoric storks. These birds were almost as tall as a human. They packed huge, dagger-like beaks built to split raw flesh. Chasing them off took total, coordinated intimidation, hurling rocks, swinging thick branches, and screaming at the top of their lungs. It was a frantic scramble. Hack off whatever meat you could carry, then run like hell before the apex predators showed up to take it back. The African sun set a brutal schedule for everything on the plains. At midday, the heat peaks, and the savanna drops into a heavy, suffocating silence. Big predators, saber-toothed cats, and giant hyenas are stuck panting in the sparse shade, knowing that hunting right now means risking a fatal heat stroke. But this quiet, scorching window was exactly when Homo habilis made their moves. While the lethal competition slept, our ancestors trekked miles across the baked earth. They relied on a biological weapon no one else had. Shedding their thick fur and developing more sweat glands, it let them cool down while staying constantly on the move. Sweating let early humans push deep into the dangerous open plains right when the sun pinned their enemies down. It was a brilliant evolutionary loophole. Still, hiking through midday heat was a massive gamble. The baked dirt blistered bare feet, and the sun sucked the moisture right out of them. Every trip into that heat haze was a ticking clock. If they couldn't find water before their internal reserves crashed, they'd collapse long before the predators woke up for dinner. Even in the dead of the afternoon, they weren't alone in the heat. Homo habilis shared the foraging grounds with Therapithecus oswaldi, an ancient baboon the size of a female gorilla. These massive primates moved in deafening, aggressive troops of hundreds. If a troop decided they wanted a specific patch of wild tubers or thorny bushes, early humans had no choice. Drop the digging sticks and run. Fighting a dominant male giant baboon was suicide. They had massive canines and enough raw power to rip an early hominid to pieces. Homo habilis had to read their complex social cues from a safe distance, tracking those deep barking calls echoing across the dirt. Staying alive meant memorizing the territorial borders of stronger, more numerous animals. It was a constant game of ecological chess. Steal the resources you need, but don't start a riot. Every so often, the brutal environment handed early humans a massive jackpot. Pleistocene megafauna were huge, and when one died naturally, it left behind a literal mountain of meat. But finding an intact, dead elephant relative like a Dinotherium was a totally different game than chasing vultures away from a gazelle. Even top predators couldn't chew through the insanely thick, leathery armor on a dead giant. Lions and hyenas would spend hours chewing on tough hide without ever tasting the meat inside. But a struck volcanic stone doesn't need jaw strength. Homo habilis used sharp quartz flakes like prehistoric scalpels. They targeted natural weak points in the thick skin around the belly or joints, carefully slicing through the armor that kept the giant cats out. The second that skin broke, the clock started. The scent of fresh blood caught the wind, acting like a siren for miles. They hacked off heavy chunks of muscle and fat, hands slick with blood, struggling to grip the slippery stone tools. One slip of a razor-sharp rock could slice open a leg artery, instantly turning the butcher into the next meal. To survive life on the move, early humans built up a massive mental map of a brutal world. Their growing brains were constantly logging thousands of square miles of rough terrain. They knew exactly which dry riverbeds hid water beneath the sand. They memorized the exact rock formations that held the best stone for tools. This geography wasn't just trivia, it kept them alive. And they passed it all down for generations, without a single written word or drawn map. Because this stored knowledge was so crucial, the oldest members of the group were invaluable. Remember, a simple tooth infection could kill you in a week back then. Hitting 30 was a massive milestone. Those who made it to old age were the ultimate lifelines for their people. When a brutal, multi-year drought baked the plains and waterholes cracked into dry mud, the younger adults had no idea what to do. The gray-haired elders stepped up. Relying on fuzzy memories of a similar disaster decades ago, they led the starving group miles away to a hidden, permanent spring. Human memory literally saved their bloodline. That sharp eye for detail didn't stop at the horizon. They watched the ground just as closely. Long before anyone invented bows or spears, early humans became master trackers. They read dust and mud like a live feed. A crushed blade of grass, a snapped twig, a faint smudge in dried mud. These were clear signals of what had passed by and when. By looking at a set of massive paw prints, they could tell instantly if a saber-toothed cat was just ambling toward a drink or actively stalking prey. That kind of fluency kept them one step ahead of some terrifying predators. But knowing the land and having sharp rocks wasn't always enough. Illness could tear through early hominid groups fast. Sleeping huddled together, eating scavenged raw meat and drinking from stagnant pools left them wide open to lethal bacteria and parasites. When someone caught a fever, the group turned to the savannah's natural medicine cabinet. We've actually found microscopic traces of medicinal plants, bitter leaves, and antibacterial bark on fossilized teeth. They were already testing out basic botany, chewing bitter roots to fight back against severe infections. The East African Rift Valley was a violently unpredictable place. Active volcanoes loomed on the horizon, occasionally choking the plains with massive clouds of scorching ash and toxic gas. A big eruption could wipe out an ecosystem in seconds, burying forests and riverbanks under feet of gray silt. For Homo habilis, these blasts meant total chaos and forced migration. Ironically, though, those same disasters preserved their history. The ash sealed their stone tools and shattered bones away in perfect geological time capsules for millions of years. Stone flakes might have been the high-tech of the day, but Homo habilis didn't stop at rock. They were the ultimate opportunists, turning basically any scrap of nature into a handy tool. Pointed antelope horns worked perfectly for digging through hard clay or prying open tough seed pods. The heavy limb bones of medium herbivores made great clubs, ideal for cracking nuts or swatting away smaller scavengers. Meanwhile, sharp animal ribs were used to scrape the last bits of meat off discarded carcasses. As numbers grew and things got tight during dry spells, Homo habilis groups inevitably bumped into each other. These definitely weren't friendly catch-ups. Seeing a rival group edge toward a good patch of fruit trees or a fresh carcass meant an immediate threat to survival. Fights broke out instantly. Screaming, chest beating, rocks flying everywhere, they brawled over high-quality stone quarries and the best riverbeds for finding basalt cobbles. Just staying alive took serious teamwork and dividing up the daily chores. The fastest adults would head far out onto the open plains, watching for circling vultures and scavenging for meat. Mothers with young kids hung back near the safety of the trees. This foraging group would spend hours digging up tubers, picking wild berries and stripping edible leaves, all while keeping an eye on the toddlers. Later, when the scavengers hauled back fresh meat and marrow bones, the whole band would sit down together to share the food, cementing the social bonds that held them together. Farther south, in what's now South Africa, another group of early humans navigated treacherous limestone hills packed with sinkholes and hidden underground caves. Stepping into a hidden shaft meant instant death, or being trapped at the bottom of a dark pit to starve. In fact, many Homo habilis fossils in these southern sites weren't living cave dwellers at all, but scraps dropped into sinkholes by giant leopards eating prey in the branches above. Yet even in the middle of all this bloody competition, we see the first hints of real compassion. Fossilized remains show individuals who survived severe bone fractures or massive dental loss long before those injuries could ever heal. A Homo habilis who couldn't walk or chew tough meat was completely dependent on the group. Others had to bring them food, shield them from predators, and carry water when they were at their weakest. A huge shift from pure animal instinct to genuine empathy. Microscopic scratches on Homo habilis teeth read almost like a detailed menu. These wear patterns show an amazingly flexible diet that shifted wildly from season to season. In good times, they gorged on soft fruits and tender shoots, leaving their tooth enamel smooth and polished. During severe droughts, those same teeth got pitted and scratched from grinding down coarse, sandy roots and tough seeds. Being able to pivot their diet like that was their ultimate shield against extinction. Navigating that ancient world required senses tuned to the absolute limit. In dense brush, where visibility was down to a few feet, Homo habilis relied heavily on hearing to map out hidden danger. They recognized the specific alarm calls of oxpecker birds, signaling a cranky rhino was resting nearby, and learned to spot the difference between the calm grunts of a feeding herd and the sudden tense silence that meant a predator was sneaking through the grass. Misreading a single sound could cost an early human their life. Crossing a massive river during seasonal migrations was one of the most terrifying moments a group could face. Homo habilis weren't natural swimmers, and deep, fast-moving currents were deadly. They'd search miles of riverbank for shallow fords or massive fallen trees to use as natural bridges, but the rushing water was only half the threat. Rivers were controlled by Hippopotamus gorgops, a monstrous ancient hippo with eye stalks sticking out of the water like periscopes. These territorial giants were heavily armored and fiercely aggressive, easily capable of snapping a small hominid in half. When the dry season finally broke, torrential rains brought life back to the plains, along with a whole new kind of misery. Downpours turned dusty ground into thick, sucking mud. Tracking became impossible as heavy rain washed away footprints and wiped out scent trails. Hominids found themselves shivering uncontrollably in wet brush, soaked to the bone, and prime targets for hypothermia. Without thick fur or the warmth of a campfire, a sudden drop in nighttime temperatures during a wet season storm could easily kill the youngest and oldest members, forcing the group to huddle tightly together in dense thickets just to survive. Danger could also drop straight out of a clear blue sky. Pleistocene air was patrolled by giant eagles armed with razor-sharp talons the size of bear claws. These silent hunters specifically targeted vulnerable infants clinging to their mothers. A passing shadow was the only warning before a massive winged predator dived at terrifying speed. The group had to constantly monitor the canopy and open sky, throwing rocks and screaming wildly to break the attack trajectory. Leaving a toddler sitting alone in the dirt for even a few seconds was an invitation for an aerial strike. Searching for food meant shoving bare hands into dark crevices, hollow logs, and dead leaves, putting early humans directly in the strike zone of silent, venomous killers. Massive puff adders and aggressive cobras blended seamlessly into dry rocks and yellow grass. Reaching blindly for a starchy root could trigger a lightning-fast bite. A dose of neurotoxic venom was an agonizing, inescapable death sentence. To counter this, Homo habilis moved with calculating caution, probing undergrowth with long sticks before stepping forward or reaching down to forage. Surviving this hostile maze pushed Homo habilis to pull off a cognitive trick that truly set them apart. They started rigging the landscape in their favor. Rather than lugging heavy rocks everywhere, they built hidden stashes. They would stockpile high-quality river stones in smart spots, right next to natural game trails or seasonal watering holes. If a dead animal turned up weeks or even months later, they didn't waste precious minutes hunting for a good rock. They just grabbed their pre-stashed toolkits and got right to work, beating the giant scavengers to the punch. Relying so heavily on sharp daytime vision came with a brutal biological trade-off. Their eyes got great at picking out ripe yellow fruit against green leaves or spotting distant vultures circling in the bright sun, but they paid for it by slowly losing their night vision. Once the sun dipped below the horizon, Homo habilis was virtually blind next to the big cats. If a leopard's eyes glowed in the brush, the predator could track every flinch. The humans? They were just staring helplessly into pitch black. That intense vulnerability at night hardwired a deep, primal fear of the dark directly into the human brain. It's a psychological ghost that still haunts our species millions of years later. Even with the constant terror, there were rare moments of total high-calorie triumph. One of the best and most dangerous prizes out there was wild honey. Bees packed massive hives high up inside hollow baobab trees. Reaching that golden jackpot meant free climbing rough bark while getting swarmed by thousands of angry, stinging insects. The hominids just pushed through the searing pain of dozens of stings. They ripped the wax combs right out of the tree with bare hands and bolted as fast as their legs would carry them. The sheer amount of dense, pure energy packed into wild honey was a massive boost for their exhausted bodies. A few painfully swollen faces were entirely worth the payoff. Out on the shores of the massive rift lakes, the menu looked a little different. As long as the giant crocodiles were busy elsewhere, early humans could raid the shallows for rich aquatic food. Wading carefully into the reeds, they snatched up freshwater crabs, big snails, and fish trapped in drying pools. These trips provided a crucial hit of omega-3 fatty acids, exactly the building blocks an expanding brain needed to wire up complex neural pathways. But standing at the water's edge left them horribly exposed. Their feet sank deep into the soft clay, completely stripping away their only real defense, the ability to spin around and sprint the second a predator rushed them. Whenever wild fig trees or groves of ancient palms ripened, it triggered an absolute feeding frenzy across the ecosystem. For a few brief weeks, those trees rained thousands of sweet, high-calorie fruits down into the dry dirt. Homo habilis had to move fast to get their share, but that sugary scent drew a crowd. Massive herds of early elephants and giant armor-plated rhinoceroses converged on the groves, completely flattening the undergrowth to eat. A small crew of handyman ancestors had to dart through a forest of moving legs. They snatched fallen fruit right out of the dirt, constantly dodging heavy hooves that could crush them in a split second. Back at their temporary camps, stone tool tech was getting a lot smarter. Homo habilis started dragging in huge, flat boulders to use as primitive anvils. By setting a marrow bone or a dense nut on the anvil and smashing it from above with a heavy, rounded hammerstone, they could multiply their physical strength tenfold. It was an incredibly efficient way to process food. The problem? It created a rhythmic, metallic clicking that echoed right across the quiet valley. That repetitive cracking was basically a dinner bell for local predators. The toolmakers had to constantly stop working, keeping their heads on a swivel to scan the brush for creeping shadows. Volcanic eruptions regularly dumped thick, heavy layers of fresh ash across the land. Trudging through those gray, lifeless moonscapes was both creepy and downright dangerous. The fine dust choked lungs and turned precious waterholes into toxic slush. Yet, to a skilled tracker, a fresh layer of ash was a clean slate. Any animal stepping onto it left crystal-clear footprints. Homo habilis studied these fresh prints to figure out the exact weight, speed, and heading of a passing herd, or a lone sabertooth. That ability let them move through devastated terrain with impressive accuracy, dodging hidden traps and guiding their group out of harm's way. Sudden storms completely flipped the rules of survival on the open plains. Violent desert winds would rip across the savannah, whipping up dust storms that cut visibility down to a few feet. Most animals hunkered down and froze in place during these blinding squalls. For Homo habilis, though, the screaming wind and stinging dust were perfect cover. The roaring storms swallowed their footsteps, while swirling sand wiped out their scent entirely. Wrapped in the gale, a brave hunting group could slip right up to a feeding predator or a guarded waterhole. They moved like ghosts, snatching up food and water they couldn't touch on a calm day. Making fire from scratch was still hundreds of thousands of years away, but Homo habilis paid close attention to wild brush fires and saw how intense heat changed things. They saw that fire-charred branches turned hard and rigid, perfect for driving deep into rock-hard clay soil. They noticed how heat shattered certain stones, exposing razor-sharp edges without anyone having to hit them with a hammerstone. Those simple observations were the earliest roots of human chemistry, the first realization that nature could be tweaked and shaped to keep people alive. Beyond calories and fat, these early humans desperately needed something far harder to find inland: salt. Constant sweating in the blistering midday sun drained their sodium reserves fast. To get those essential minerals back, Homo habilis shadowed massive herds, trailing their trampled paths to exposed salt licks and chalk cliffs to eat white clay. Eating that clay delivered much-needed sodium and calcium while soaking up tough plant toxins in wild tubers, letting them digest harsh roots without getting violently sick. Near the end of the dry season, shifting winds often pushed a dark, rolling cloud over the horizon. It looked like a storm front, but it was alive. Billions of desert locusts slammed into the plains. The deafening swarm wiped out every green leaf down to bare bark in minutes, pelting skin like hail and making it tough to even draw a breath. To Homo habilis, though, this plague was an all-you-can-eat buffet. They plucked fat insects straight out of the air. Getting proper deep sleep was a real ordeal. Heading up into high branches kept ground predators away, but these hominids didn't have the locking joints that let monkeys sleep soundly without plummeting. They had to grip the bark constantly. Slipping into deep REM sleep relaxed their muscles, meaning a terrifying fall straight down into the pitch-black brush. This constant sleep deprivation left them perpetually exhausted, even as their expanding brains craved REM sleep to recover. That pressure eventually forced their descendants out of the trees, driving them to figure out how to sleep safely on the ground. Death was everywhere. A festering claw wound, an infected tooth, or a sudden fever could take down a group member fast, and nobody had time for elaborate burials. Homo habilis didn't dig deep graves. In the crushing African heat, a rotting body was an instant beacon for every massive meat-eater for miles. The survivors made a brutal choice: leave the fallen to giant scavengers and run. Still, fossil evidence of older individuals with healed catastrophic injuries shows they understood loss. It's the very first glimpse of human grief in a species ruled by ruthless natural laws. Without sharp claws, surviving dense thickets meant early humans had to outsource their early warning systems by eavesdropping on other species. They learned to listen for the frantic alarm barks of ancient vervet monkeys in the canopy. A specific, panicked pitch meant a leopard was climbing the trunk. A nervous twitch from a grazing gazelle signaled a saber-toothed cat stalking through the tall grass. By using hundreds of animals as a living radar network, a small foraging party could quietly slip away from an ambush before the predator even knew they were there. As the dry season dragged into its final weeks, huge rift lakes shrank into treacherous pits of dark mud. These became arenas for dramatic life-and-death struggles. A thirsty mega-herbivore wading into the shallows would suddenly sink to its chest in heavy clay. Its panicked roars echoed across the baking plains, drawing in our ancestors. Scavenging a stuck, live animal was incredibly dangerous. Hominids crept across the unstable mud crust, risking getting trapped themselves. They waited patiently, just out of reach of massive tusks, letting the heat and exhaustion finish the job before moving in with stone blades. Even the sharpest stone blade goes dull after hacking through thick bone and elephant hide. The search for raw materials never stopped. Homo habilis had a keen eye for geology. They knew that river cobbles, weathered by sun and rain, held unique internal tension. Struck just right, they produced edges sharper than modern surgical steel. They fiercely guarded their mobile toolkits. Losing a perfectly crafted cutting flake during a chaotic retreat from giant hyenas was devastating. It forced the toolmaker to start the dangerous search all over again. While their legs adapted to long-distance walking, the upper body of Homo habilis hid a different evolutionary secret. Their shoulders were undergoing a radical biomechanical shift. The ancient ape-like shoulder, built for swinging from branches, was rotating and dropping. This change unlocked the ability to store massive elastic energy in the tendons of the arm and chest. When a pack of snarling wild dogs cornered a scavenging party, early humans didn't just wave sticks. They hurled heavy river stones with terrifying, high-velocity precision that no other primate could match. This explosive throwing power marked the dawn of human projectile defense. The lush green patches near shrinking watering holes were biological minefields. They were packed with highly toxic roots, poisonous berries, and leaves that could trigger fatal organ failure within hours. Homo habilis didn't have written encyclopedias to identify dangerous plants. Figuring out what was safe meant brutal trial and error. If a young hominid chewed an unknown root and got violently ill, the group watched and learned. They remembered the leaf shape, adding that plant to an invisible mental list paid for directly with human suffering. Surviving year after year meant reading the slow, shifting rhythms of the earth. They watched subtle seasonal changes in the night sky, correlating star positions with the arrival of life-saving monsoon rains. They noticed when specific acacia trees shed their leaves. It was a clear signal that thundering herds of wildebeest were about to start their dusty migration across the Rift Valley. Missing these environmental cues was fatal. Misjudging the turning dry season and starting a trek across the valley a week late meant finding water holes baked into cracked mud, leaving a fragile family stranded in a desert. The daily grind of staying alive was literally rewiring the human mind. Chipping a stone, recalling a hidden spring, guessing where a predator might strike next. Every single action forged dense new neural pathways. The raw stress of the African savannah forced their brains to adapt. They weren't just blindly reacting to their surroundings anymore, like grazing herds or giant reptiles. They were analyzing their world, They were imagining future outcomes and crafting physical tools to solve survival problems. Yes, it was a terrifying, bloody way to live, but that crucible forged the exact mental toughness they'd eventually need to take over the planet. Homo habilis didn't survive the ancient world with muscle. They made it through the African savanna because they adapted. They relied on sharp stone flakes, growing brains, and tight-knit cooperation in a landscape that was practically built to kill them. Every cracked bone and brutal fight laid the groundwork for everyone who came next. Small, fragile, and constantly hunted, the handyman clung to life against impossible odds, making sure the human story was only just beginning.